The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the dusty Nebraska road, and Penelope Turner grabbed the window frame to steady herself, her knuckles white with the effort of holding on while her patience crumbled like dried earth. She had been traveling for 3 weeks from Boston, and every mile westward had stripped away another layer of the civilized world she knew, replacing it with endless prairie grass, scorching sun, and a landscape so vast it made her feel insignificant. The year was 1878, and she was heading toward Red Cloud, Nebraska, a town she had never seen, to start a life she had never imagined, all because her father's debts had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single opportunity from a distant aunt she barely remembered. The other passengers in the coach were a weathered farmer who smelled of tobacco and sweat, and a woman in a faded calico dress who clutched a carpet bag as if it contained all her worldly possessions. Neither had spoken much during the journey, and Penelope had been grateful for the silence, though now, as the sun beat down through the window and dust coated her traveling dress, she wished for any distraction from her mounting anxiety. She had always been impulsive, quick to act and quicker to lose her temper when things did not move according to her wishes. Patience had never been her virtue, and the endless waiting, the slow crawl across the country, the uncertainty of what awaited her, all of it gnawed at her nerves until she felt ready to scream. When the coach finally rolled into Red Cloud, Penelope's first impression was one of profound disappointment. The main street was unpaved, lined with wooden buildings that looked hastily constructed and already weary from the elements. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies, and a few people moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. This was not Boston with its brick buildings and gas lamps, its theaters and shops. This was the edge of civilization, where the prairie met human ambition, and Penelope felt her heart sink with the realization that this was now her home. She stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after so many hours of travel, and looked around for anyone who might be her Aunt Margaret. The station was little more than a small building with a sign that read Red Cloud Station, and a man in a dusty coat was unloading luggage from the roof of the coach. Penelope smoothed her skirts and tried to compose herself, but the heat and exhaustion made her irritable. "Excuse me," she said to the man handling the luggage, her voice sharper than she intended. "I am looking for Margaret Turner. Do you know where I might find her?" The man barely glanced at her, setting down a trunk with a thud. "Cannot say I know everyone in town, miss." "You might try the general store. Folks there know most everyone." Penelope felt a flash of annoyance at his indifference, but she swallowed her retort and picked up her own small bag, refusing to wait for help. She walked toward what appeared to be the general store, her boots kicking up dust with each step, and pushed through the door with more force than necessary. A bell jangled overhead, and the dim interior smelled of flour, coffee, and something else she could not identify. A middle-aged woman behind the counter looked up, her expression cautious. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for Margaret Turner," Penelope said, setting her bag down. "I am her niece, Penelope, from Boston. She was expecting me." The woman's face softened with recognition, but then something else crossed her features, something that looked like pity. "Oh dear, you have not heard then. Margaret passed 3 weeks ago. Fever took her quick. I am so sorry." The words hit Penelope like a physical blow. She stood there, unable to process what she had just heard. Her aunt, the one person who had offered her refuge, was gone. She had traveled all this way, endured weeks of discomfort and uncertainty, only to arrive at a dead end. For a moment, she could not breathe, could not think. Then the panic set in, followed swiftly by anger. 3 weeks ago, Penelope's voice rose. Why did no one send word? I have been traveling all this time and no one thought to inform me. The woman behind the counter looked uncomfortable. There was not much time, and Margaret, well, she did not have much family that anyone knew of. We did not know you were coming until after. I am truly sorry. Penelope wanted to rail against the unfairness of it all, to demand answers and solutions, but she knew it would do no good. She was alone in a strange town with no money, no prospects, and no idea what to do next. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its completeness. Is there anywhere I can stay?" Penelope asked, her voice smaller now, the fight draining out of her. "I have very little money." The woman hesitated, then said, "There is a boarding house down the street. Mrs. Callahan runs it. She might have a room, though I cannot say for how long you could afford it." Penelope nodded, picked up her bag, and walked out into the harsh sunlight. The boarding house was easy to find. A 2-story structure with peeling paint and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. Mrs. Callahan was a stout woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked Penelope up and down, taking in the travel-worn dress and the desperation in the younger woman's eyes. "I can give you a room for a week," Mrs. Callahan said after Penelope explained her situation. "After that, you will need to pay or find other arrangements." "I run a business, not a charity." "I understand," Penelope said, though she had no idea how she would manage even a week. She paid what she could and was shown to a small room on the 2nd floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. The window looked out over the main street, and Penelope stood there for a long time, staring at the unfamiliar landscape and trying to figure out what to do next. That evening, she lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She had always been quick to act, quick to make decisions, but now she had no clear path forward. She needed work, but what could she do in a place like this? She had been educated, could read and write, knew literature and music, but those skills seemed useless here. The frustration built inside her until she wanted to scream, but she bit it back, knowing it would accomplish nothing. The next morning, Penelope woke early and decided she would find work, no matter what it took. She washed her face in the basin, pinned her dark hair back, and went downstairs. Mrs. Callahan was in the kitchen, making breakfast for the few boarders who stayed there. "Is there any work in this town?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to earn money." Mrs. Callahan looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. "Not much for a woman like you. There is the saloon, but I do not imagine you would want that. Some of the ranches take on help during busy seasons, but they usually want men. You might try asking at the general store or see if anyone needs a school teacher, though I think the position is filled." Penelope thanked her and set out, determined to find something. She spent the morning going from business to business, but the answers were always the same. No work, no positions, nothing for a woman from the East who had no experience with the hard labor that defined life out here. By midday, she was exhausted and disheartened, standing on the edge of town and staring out at the endless prairie. That was when she saw him. A man on horseback, riding in from the open land, leading a string of cattle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent under the sun. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a faded shirt, and worn trousers, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. He guided the cattle toward a pen on the outskirts of town, and Penelope found herself watching him, curious despite herself. He dismounted, secured the cattle, and then turned, his eyes landing on her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance, and Penelope felt something shift inside her, though she could not have said what. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then walked toward her. "You look lost," he said, his voice low and calm, with a hint of a drawl that marked him as someone who had spent his life in these parts. Penelope bristled at the observation, her pride stinging. "I am not lost. I am simply looking. Looking for what?" "Work," she admitted, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. "Though it seems there is none to be found." He studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You are not from around here." "Boston," Penelope said, lifting her chin. "I came to stay with my aunt, but she passed before I arrived. Now I am trying to figure out what to do next." He nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "That is a hard situation. This is not an easy place for someone without family or means." "I am aware of that," Penelope snapped, her patience worn thin. "I do not need someone to tell me how difficult my circumstances are. I need solutions." To her surprise, he did not take offense at her tone. Instead, he simply looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "I might have work for you if you are willing to learn." Penelope blinked, caught off guard. "What kind of work?" "I run a ranch about 10 miles out of town. I need someone to help with the household. Cooking, cleaning, mending." "My housekeeper left a month ago to care for her sick mother, and I have been managing on my own. It is not easy work, but it is honest, and I can offer room and board along with wages." Penelope hesitated, her mind racing. The idea of going to a ranch, of living in isolation with a man she did not know, seemed reckless. But what choice did she have? She could not afford the boarding house much longer, and there was no other work to be found. She studied him, trying to gauge whether he was trustworthy. There was something solid about him, something steady that made her think he was a man of his word. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked bluntly. "You do not," he said simply, "but I can give you references in town if you want them. My name is Thomas Ashford. I have been ranching here for 10 years, and I have a reputation for being fair. You can ask anyone." Penelope nodded slowly. "I will ask, and if what you say is true, I will accept your offer." "Fair enough," Thomas said. He tipped his hat again and turned to go, then paused. "I will be at the general store in an hour if you decide. We can ride out today if you are ready." He walked away, leaving Penelope standing there, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. She spent the next hour asking about Thomas Ashford, and everyone she spoke to had nothing but good things to say. He was known as a hard worker, a fair employer, and a man who kept his word. Reassured, Penelope returned to the boarding house, gathered her few belongings, and met Thomas at the general store. They rode out together, Thomas on his horse and Penelope on a gentle mare he had brought for her. The journey took a few hours, and Penelope found herself watching the landscape change around them. The prairie stretched out in all directions, a sea of grass that rippled in the wind. The sky was enormous, a brilliant blue that seemed to go on forever, and Penelope felt both exhilarated and terrified by the sheer vastness of it all. Thomas did not talk much during the ride, but his silence was not uncomfortable. He seemed content to let the land speak for itself, and Penelope found herself appreciating the quiet after the chaos of the past weeks. When they finally arrived at the ranch, she was surprised by what she saw. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings, a barn, corrals, and a windmill that creaked softly in the breeze. It was simple but well maintained, and there was something welcoming about it. Thomas dismounted and helped Penelope down, then led her inside. The interior was clean but sparse, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace, and a few pieces of simple furniture. There were 2 bedrooms, and Thomas showed her to the smaller one, which had a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "This will be your room," he said. "You are free to make it your own. Meals are shared, and I expect honesty and hard work. In return, I will treat you fairly and pay you what is owed. Does that sound acceptable?" "Yes," Penelope said, setting her bag down. "It does. Good. We will start tomorrow. You look like you could use some rest." He left her alone, and Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, trying to absorb everything that had happened. She was miles from town, alone with a man she barely knew, in a place so different from anything she had ever experienced that it felt like another world. But as she looked out the window at the endless prairie, she felt something unexpected, a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. The next morning, Penelope woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. She dressed quickly and went out to the main room where Thomas was already up, stoking the fire in the stove. He looked up as she entered, his expression neutral. "Morning," he said. "There is coffee on the stove. Help yourself." Penelope poured herself a cup and took a cautious sip. It was strong and bitter, nothing like the coffee she had known in Boston, but it was hot and woke her up. Thomas handed her a list he had written, detailing the tasks that needed to be done around the house. It was longer than she had expected, and her heart sank a little. "I have never done most of these things," she admitted, looking at the list. "I was not raised to cook or clean. We had staff for that." Thomas nodded as if he had expected as much. "Then I will teach you. It will take time, but you will learn." And so began Penelope's education in ranch life. Thomas was a patient teacher, which surprised her. When she burned the first batch of biscuits, he simply scraped them into the fire and showed her how to adjust the heat. When she struggled to scrub the floors, he demonstrated the proper technique and let her practice until she got it right. When she grew frustrated, which was often, he did not scold or criticize. He simply waited, his steady presence a calm anchor in the storm of her emotions. Days turned into weeks, and Penelope found herself slowly adapting to the rhythm of life on the ranch. She learned to cook simple meals, to mend clothes, to keep the house clean and orderly. It was hard work, harder than anything she had ever done, and there were moments when she wanted to give up, to scream at the injustice of her situation. But Thomas was always there, patient and steady, showing her that progress came not from rushing but from taking one step at a time. One afternoon, as Penelope was hanging laundry on the line, she felt a surge of frustration as the wind kept whipping the sheets out of her hands. She tried to pin them up quickly, but the more she rushed, the more tangled everything became. Finally, she threw the clothespin down and let out a sound of pure exasperation. Thomas, who had been working on a fence nearby, looked up. He set down his tools and walked over, his expression calm. "What is wrong?" "Everything," Penelope said, her voice tight with frustration. "I cannot do this. I cannot seem to do anything right. I am too slow, too clumsy, too impatient. I was not made for this life." Thomas picked up the clothespin and handed it to her. "You are learning. That takes time." "I do not have time," Penelope said, her voice rising. "I need to be good at this now. I need to prove that I can manage, that I am not useless." "You are not useless," Thomas said quietly. "You are learning a new way of life, and that is hard, but you are doing better than you think." Penelope looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "How can you say that? I burn food, I break things, I cannot even hang laundry without making a mess of it." "But you keep trying," Thomas said. "And that is what matters. You do not give up even when it is hard. That takes strength." Penelope felt something inside her crack open, a vulnerability she had been trying to keep buried. "I have never known patience," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have always wanted things to happen quickly, to be done immediately. But out here, nothing moves fast." Everything takes time, and I do not know how to live like that." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Patience is not something you are born with. It is something you learn. And you are learning it now, whether you realize it or not." He picked up one of the sheets and showed her how to pin it properly, his movements slow and deliberate. Penelope watched him, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke, that made her feel safe, as if she could make mistakes and it would be all right. She took the sheet from him and pinned it up, this time more carefully, and when it stayed in place, she felt a small surge of triumph. "See," Thomas said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "You are learning." As the weeks turned into months, Penelope found herself drawn to Thomas in ways she had not expected. She began to notice the small things about him, the way he always made sure she had enough to eat before he served himself, the way he spoke gently to the horses, the way he never raised his voice even when things went wrong. He was different from any man she had known in Boston. He did not posture or boast. He simply was, solid and dependable like the land itself. She also began to see the ranch through his eyes. At first, it had seemed harsh and unforgiving, but now she noticed the beauty in it. The way the grass turned gold in the late afternoon sun, the way the sky stretched out like a canvas, the way the wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. It was a different kind of beauty, raw and untamed, and it stirred something deep inside her. One evening, after supper, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was ablaze with color, shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed almost unreal. Penelope sat in one of the rocking chairs Thomas had made, and he leaned against the porch railing, his hat pushed back on his head. "I never imagined I would end up here," Penelope said, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I left Boston, I thought I was going to a town, to a civilized place. I thought my life would continue much as it had, just in a different location. But this is nothing like what I expected." "Is that a bad thing?" Thomas asked, his voice quiet. Penelope considered the question. "No," she said slowly. "It is not bad. It is just different. I am different. I do not know if I like who I was before, the person who could not stand to wait for anything, who always had to have things her way. Out here, that person does not work. Out here, I have to learn to be someone else." "You do not have to be someone else," Thomas said, turning to look at her. "You just have to learn to adapt. The core of who you are, that does not change. You are still strong, still determined. You just have to channel those things differently." Penelope met his gaze, and something passed between them, a connection that made her heart skip a beat. She realized in that moment that she had come to care for him deeply. It was not just gratitude for his kindness or respect for his skill. It was something more, something that made her want to be near him, to hear his voice, to see the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But she also felt fear. She had never been good at relationships, had always been too impatient, too quick to anger. What if she ruined this? What if her flaws drove him away? The thought made her chest tighten with anxiety. As if sensing her turmoil, Thomas said, "You do not have to figure everything out at once. Take your time. There is no rush." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back. "You always say that. Take your time, be patient. But what if I cannot? What if I am not capable of it?" "You are," Thomas said simply. "I have seen it. Every day you are more patient than the day before. You just do not give yourself credit for it." That night, as Penelope lay in bed, she thought about Thomas's words. She thought about how he had never once made her feel inadequate or foolish, even when she struggled. He had shown her patience in every moment, and in doing so, he had taught her what it meant to be patient with herself. It was a revelation that shook her to her core, and she realized that she was falling in love with him, had been falling in love with him for weeks, maybe even from the first moment they met. But love was terrifying. It meant vulnerability, it meant risk, and Penelope had spent her life avoiding both. She did not know if she was brave enough to tell him how she felt, to take that leap and trust that he might feel the same way. So she kept her feelings hidden, locked away where they could not hurt her. The seasons changed, and autumn arrived on the prairie, bringing cooler temperatures and shorter days. The work on the ranch intensified as Thomas prepared for winter, and Penelope found herself busier than ever. She had become skilled at the tasks that had once seemed impossible, and she took pride in her ability to manage the household. But even as she grew more confident in her abilities, the unspoken feelings between her and Thomas weighed on her. One afternoon, as they were working together to bring in firewood, Thomas suddenly stopped and looked at her. "You have been quiet lately," he said. "Is something wrong?" Penelope hesitated, her heart pounding. She could lie, could say everything was fine, but she was tired of hiding. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking, "but I do not know how." Thomas set down the wood he was carrying and turned to face her fully. "You can tell me anything. You know that." Penelope took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I have never known patience," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My whole life I have been impatient, quick to anger, quick to give up when things did not go my way. But you have shown me what patience looks like. You have been patient with me every single moment since I arrived here, even when I was difficult, even when I failed. And I have fallen in love with you." She stopped, her heart hammering in her chest, and waited for his response. Thomas stared at her, his expression unreadable, and for a terrible moment Penelope thought she had made a mistake, that she had ruined everything. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, a real smile, the kind she had only seen hints of before. "Penelope," he said, stepping closer to her, "I have been in love with you for months. I just did not know if you felt the same way." Relief and joy flooded through her, so intense she felt dizzy. You love me." "I do," Thomas said, reaching out to take her hands in his. "From the moment you stood in that town, stubborn and proud and determined not to give up, I knew there was something special about you. Watching you learn, watching you grow, it has been the greatest privilege of my life." Penelope felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of happiness. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that I was not good enough, that I would drive you away with my impatience and my flaws." "You could never drive me away," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. "Your flaws are part of who you are, and I love all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable." They stood there, holding each other, and Penelope felt a peace she had never known before. She had spent her whole life fighting, struggling, trying to force things to happen according to her will. But here, in Thomas's arms, she realized that sometimes the best things came not from force but from patience, from allowing life to unfold in its own time. That evening they sat on the porch again, but this time Thomas had his arm around her, and Penelope leaned into him, feeling safe and content. They talked about the future, about what they wanted, and for the first time Penelope allowed herself to dream not of what she had lost but of what she could build. "I want to marry you," Thomas said, his voice steady and sure. "If you will have me." Penelope looked up at him, her heart full. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the church in Red Cloud. A few of the townspeople attended, and Mrs. Callahan from the boarding house made a cake. It was simple and unpretentious, nothing like the grand weddings Penelope had attended in Boston, but it was perfect. As she stood beside Thomas, speaking her vows, she felt a certainty she had never felt before. This was where she belonged with this man on this land. Life as Thomas's wife brought new challenges and new joys. Penelope continued to learn and grow, and Thomas continued to be patient with her, even when she struggled. They worked side by side, building their life together, and Penelope discovered that she had a strength she had never known she possessed. She could endure hardship, could face uncertainty, because she had Thomas beside her, and she had learned the value of patience. The first winter was hard. Snow blanketed the prairie, and the temperatures dropped so low that the water in the basin froze solid overnight. Penelope had never experienced cold like this, and there were days when she thought she could not bear it. But Thomas was there, keeping the fire burning, making sure she was warm, teaching her how to survive in this harsh land. And she learned, just as she had learned everything else, one step at a time. Spring came, and with it a sense of renewal. The prairie came alive with wildflowers, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. Penelope planted a garden, something she had never done before, and she watched with wonder as the seeds she had planted pushed up through the soil and began to grow. It was a small miracle, and it reminded her that patience was not about waiting for things to happen but about nurturing growth, allowing things to develop in their own time. That summer, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and fear. She had never thought much about children, had never imagined herself as a mother, but now, carrying Thomas's child, she felt a fierce protectiveness and a deep desire to be good enough for this new life. When she told Thomas, his face lit up with a happiness so pure it took her breath away. "We are going to have a baby," he said, pulling her close. "I cannot believe it. Are you happy?" Penelope asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am happier than I have ever been," Thomas said, kissing her forehead. "You have given me everything, Penelope. A home, a life, and now a family. I could not ask for more." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope struggled with sickness in the early months, and as her belly grew, she found it harder to do the work she was used to doing. But Thomas was patient, taking on extra tasks, making sure she rested, and never once complaining. He read to her in the evenings, his voice a soothing balm, and he talked to the baby, telling stories about the ranch and the life they would have together. In late winter, their son was born. It was a difficult labor, long and painful, and there were moments when Penelope thought she could not endure it. But Thomas was there, holding her hand, encouraging her, and when the baby finally arrived, screaming and healthy, Penelope felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. They named him William, after Thomas's father, and he was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that already seemed to take in the world with curiosity. Raising William brought new challenges. Penelope had no experience with babies, and she often felt lost and overwhelmed. But Thomas was there, patient as always, helping her figure out what the baby needed, reassuring her when she doubted herself. They learned together, stumbling through the sleepless nights and the endless feedings, and Penelope discovered that motherhood, like everything else, required patience. She could not rush William's development, could not force him to sleep through the night or stop crying on command. She had to learn to respond to his needs, to be present in each moment, and to trust that she was enough. As William grew from a baby into a toddler, Penelope found herself marveling at the life they had built. The ranch prospered, and they added more cattle, expanded the house, and hired a few hands to help with the work. Penelope became known in Red Cloud as a capable and kind woman, someone who could be relied upon, and she formed friendships with other women in the area. She was no longer the impatient girl from Boston who had arrived with nothing but desperation and pride. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher's partner, and she had earned those roles through hard work and patience. One evening, when William was 3 years old, Penelope and Thomas sat on the porch again, watching their son play in the yard. He was chasing a chicken, laughing with delight, and the sound filled Penelope's heart with joy. She leaned against Thomas, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and she thought about how far they had come. "You ever miss Boston?" Thomas asked, his voice quiet. Penelope considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss certain things, the theaters, the libraries, the ease of that life, but I do not miss who I was there. I like who I have become here. I like the person you have helped me become." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the space to grow." "You gave me patience," Penelope said, looking up at him. "You showed me what it looked like, how it felt, and you never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself. I will never be able to repay you for that." "You do not have to repay me," Thomas said. "Loving you is not a debt. It is a gift." They sat there in the fading light, holding each other, and Penelope felt a contentment so deep it was almost physical. She had everything she needed, everything she had ever wanted, even if she had not known it when she first arrived in Red Cloud. The years passed, and their family grew. Penelope gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose and another son they named Samuel. The house was filled with the noise and chaos of children, and Penelope often found herself exhausted, but she was also happier than she had ever imagined possible. Thomas was a devoted father, patient with the children just as he had been patient with her, and he taught them the values of hard work, honesty, and kindness. William grew into a strong, curious boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride, to rope, to care for the cattle. Rose was more like Penelope, quick-witted and impatient, but she also had a tender heart and a fierce loyalty to her family. Samuel was the youngest, gentle and thoughtful, with a love for animals that made him a favorite among the ranch hands. Penelope watched her children grow, and she saw herself in them, both the good and the bad. She saw her impatience in Rose, her stubbornness in William, her sensitivity in Samuel. But she also saw Thomas in them, his steadiness, his kindness, his patience. And she realized that they were creating something new, a family that was a blend of who they had been and who they were becoming. One day, when Rose was about 10 years old, she came to Penelope in tears, frustrated because she could not master a new skill she was trying to learn. Penelope sat her daughter down and looked into her tearful eyes. "I know it is hard," Penelope said gently. "I know you want to be good at this right now, and it is frustrating when you are not, but learning takes time. It takes patience." "I do not have patience," Rose said, echoing words Penelope had once spoken herself. Penelope smiled, remembering. "I used to say the same thing." "But patience is not something you are born with. It is something you learn, and you will learn it just like I did." "How did you learn it?" Rose asked, sniffling. "Your father taught me," Penelope said. "He showed me that patience is not about waiting for things to happen. It is about being present in each moment, about giving yourself and others the time and space to grow. And he did it by being patient with me every single day, even when I did not deserve it." Rose looked thoughtful, and then she said, "Papa is very patient, is not he?" "He is," Penelope agreed. "And he will be patient with you too. We both will. So take your time and do not be so hard on yourself." Rose hugged her, and Penelope held her daughter close, feeling a deep gratitude for the life she had been given. She had come to this place with nothing, broken and desperate, and she had found everything. She had found love, family, purpose, and most importantly, she had found herself. As the years continued to pass, Penelope and Thomas grew older together, their bodies bearing the marks of a life lived fully. Thomas's hair turned gray, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Penelope, he was as handsome as the day they met. She, too, changed, her hands roughened by work, her face marked by sun and wind, but she wore those marks with pride. They were evidence of a life well lived, of challenges met and overcome. Their children grew into adults, and one by one, they began to make their own way in the world. William took over more of the ranch work, showing a natural aptitude for it, and eventually he married a kind young woman from a neighboring ranch. Rose, independent and headstrong, decided to become a teacher and moved to a larger town, though she came home often to visit. Samuel, true to his gentle nature, became a veterinarian, studying under a doctor in Red Cloud and eventually setting up his own practice. Penelope and Thomas became grandparents, and they watched with joy as their grandchildren played in the same yard where their children had played. The ranch continued to thrive, and Penelope knew that the legacy they had built would continue for generations. It was a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of values, of patience, hard work, and love. One evening, many years after they had first met, Penelope and Thomas sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues, and the prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful. Penelope's hair was now more gray than dark, and Thomas's movements were slower, but their love was as strong as ever, deepened by the years they had shared. "You remember the day we met?" Penelope asked, her voice soft. "I do," Thomas said, smiling at the memory. "You were standing in the middle of town, looking like you wanted to fight the world," Penelope laughed. "I did want to fight the world. I was so angry, so frustrated. I felt like everything had been taken from me." "But you found something better," Thomas said, taking her hand. "We found each other." "We did," Penelope agreed, squeezing his hand. "And you taught me the most important lesson of my life. You taught me patience. You showed me that some things cannot be rushed, that the best things come to those who are willing to wait, to work, to endure. You showed me that every single moment." Thomas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And you taught me that love is worth fighting for, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most stubborn people are the ones with the biggest hearts." They sat there, holding hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned from gold to pink to purple, and the first stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Penelope felt a deep peace, a sense of completion that filled her entire being. She had lived a good life, a full life, and she had done it with the man she loved by her side. "I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too," Thomas said. "Always have, always will." As the years continued, Penelope and Thomas remained active on the ranch, though they gradually handed over more responsibilities to William and the other hands. They spent their days tending the garden, playing with their grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned their rest, and they took it gratefully, savoring the quiet moments that had once seemed so elusive to Penelope. One morning, Penelope woke to find Thomas already up, standing by the window and looking out at the prairie. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist, and they stood there together, watching the sun rise over the land they loved. "It is beautiful, is not it?" Thomas said. "It is," Penelope agreed. "I never thought I would love a place like this, but I do. It has become home in a way Boston never was." "That is because home is not a place," Thomas said, turning to look at her. "It is the people you are with, the life you build together, and we have built a good life, Penelope, a very good life." "We have," Penelope said, her eyes filling with tears. "And I would not change a single moment of it, not even the hard parts, because those hard parts made us who we are." Thomas kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of a lifetime of love and devotion. And Penelope kissed him back, pouring all her gratitude and love into that simple gesture. They had come so far, had faced so much, and they had done it together. That was all that mattered. As they grew even older, their health began to decline, as was natural. Thomas developed a persistent cough that worried Penelope, though he insisted it was nothing. She cared for him with the same patience he had once shown her, making him herbal teas, ensuring he rested, and sitting by his side when he was too tired to move. And Thomas, even in his illness, remained patient and kind, never complaining, always grateful for her presence. One winter evening, as a snowstorm raged outside, Thomas and Penelope sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. The grandchildren had all gone home, and the house was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind. Thomas was holding Penelope's hand, and she could feel the fragility of his grip, the way his strength had waned over the months. "Penelope," Thomas said, his voice hoarse, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Penelope asked, her heart clenching with fear. "I am tired," Thomas said. "And I think my time is coming soon. I can feel it." "No," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "You cannot leave me. I need you. I have always needed you." "You do not need me anymore," Thomas said gently. "You are strong, Penelope. You have been strong for a long time. You just did not see it because you were always looking to me, but you can stand on your own. You always could." "I do not want to stand on my own," Penelope sobbed. "I want to stand with you, and you have," Thomas said, reaching up to wipe her tears away. "We have had a beautiful life together. But nothing lasts forever, and I am ready to rest. I am at peace, Penelope, and I need you to be at peace too." Penelope held him close, feeling the frailty of his body, the way he trembled with exhaustion. She wanted to rage against the unfairness of it, to demand more time, but she knew that would be futile. Instead, she focused on being present, on savoring every remaining moment they had together. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days later. Penelope was by his side, holding his hand, and she felt the moment his spirit left his body. The grief was overwhelming, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe, but even in her sorrow she felt gratitude. She had been given the gift of Thomas's love, his patience, his unwavering support, and that was more than most people ever received. The funeral was attended by everyone in Red Cloud and many from the surrounding ranches. Thomas had been loved and respected, and the outpouring of support helped ease Penelope's pain. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, and William insisted she move into the main house so she would not be alone. But Penelope refused. She wanted to stay in the home she and Thomas had built, surrounded by the memories of their life together. In the months that followed, Penelope grieved deeply, but she also found strength she had not known she possessed. She continued to tend the garden, to help with the grandchildren, to be a presence in the lives of her family. She honored Thomas's memory not by retreating from life, but by living it fully, by embodying the patience and grace he had taught her. One spring morning, several years after Thomas's death, Penelope stood in the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers. She was older now, her movements slower, but her spirit was still strong. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the impatient, desperate girl who had arrived in Red Cloud so many years ago, to the woman she had become. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been a good one, filled with love, growth, and countless moments of grace. As she stood there, she felt a presence beside her, as if Thomas were standing there too, watching over her. She smiled, feeling a peace that went beyond understanding. He had given her the greatest gift anyone could give, the gift of patience, and in doing so, he had given her the ability to truly live. Penelope lived for several more years, surrounded by her family, her garden, and the land she had come to love. When she finally passed away, peacefully in her sleep, it was with a smile on her face. She was laid to rest beside Thomas, under a towering cottonwood tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription that William had chosen. Together in patience, together in love. The ranch continued to thrive under William's care, and the values that Thomas and Penelope had instilled in their family were passed down through the generations. The story of the impatient girl from Boston and the patient rancher who loved her became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. It was a story of transformation, of love that endured, and of the power of patience to change a life. And so, in the heart of the Nebraska prairie, under the endless sky, the legacy of Thomas Ashford and Penelope Turner lived on, a testament to the truth that the greatest things in life cannot be rushed, but must be nurtured with patience, care, and unwavering love. Their love story became woven into the very fabric of the land, as enduring as the prairie grass and as timeless as the stars that shone above the ranch each night. Every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the hills where they were buried, it seemed as though the land itself remembered them, celebrating the love that had taken root in that harsh, beautiful place and had flourished against all odds, teaching everyone who heard their story that patience was not weakness but the strongest form of love.